Hey, you guys, do you want a cookie? I want a cookie. We're making another dragon mask, but this time we're going to build it a little bit differently. Again, I'm going to transfer all the pieces onto foam with acetone, and I suggest you use an old rag for this instead of paper towels because the paper towels get all bunched up and gross. So you dab your rag in the acetone, and with the paper facing down, rub the acetone all over it, and you should be able to see your design through it as you're going. The biggest thing here is to not let the paper move at all, because then you get like double prints. Before you take the paper away, you can carefully lift one corner and check if there are any spots you missed, and then go over those areas again. Now once the acetone flashes off, you can mark all the numbers with a pen or a Sharpie. If you do too early, the acetone kind of messes up your pen a little bit, and you gotta get it going again. Now I didn't bother flipping the image when I printed it, so all the numbers are backwards and everything's backwards, but that's okay, as long as it's consistent. Now for this method to work properly, you have to use the right printer. It has to be a laser printer, and that means that it uses toner instead of ink. If you open your printer up and it doesn't have a giant cassette like this process isn't going to work. But don't fret, you don't have to go buy a brand new fancy printer just to do this project. Instead, simply lay your pattern down on a piece of foam, and it can be a little scrap piece. It doesn't even have to be a full piece. And then with a very sharp hobby knife, trace the piece onto the foam by cutting directly through the paper. Once the piece is transferred, you can remove that paper and then cut the rest of the way through. Try to cut as straight and as square as you can when you're doing this. One challenge that I ran into using either method is keeping track of all the little pieces before they're assembled. So what I did was print a second copy of the template so that I could verify the position of each piece. This piece was made with the acetone method, so that's why it's all upside down. Now we need to connect them all together with strips of cardboard. Cereal boxes are an excellent source of heavyweight cardstock. You can use it for book covers, tinted canvas, or in this case, little bendy strips. I cut off one side of the cereal box and laid out 1-inch strips with a line through the middle for a fold line. Then cut them out and cut them to length. I like to cut the ends off at an angle just like the tabs in the pattern. Now we have to decide what kind of glue to use. It's daunting sometimes. So I tried E6000 epoxy, which is a very strong bond, but it takes a full day to dry, 24 hours. So, I mean, you could go that way if you're really dedicated and you're very patient, but I did not like that. Super glue is good for small areas, but it is expensive and does not bond well in large areas. Then there's hot glue, which is a viable option for a lot of people. Most people have hot glue guns, but it isn't very strong, but it is fast and easy to use. And then there's contact cement, which is what I'm going to use for most of this. It's a strong bond, but it takes a little bit longer to use because you have to let it dry. We start by brushing on an even layer on the tabs and the foam pieces and let them dry for about 10 minutes. You could also prep the whole sheet of tabs with glue beforehand before you cut them up. Save some time. Then once it's dry, you can put it all together. As you notice, this is a different piece that I had already made. The pieces you just saw are still drying off camera. For pieces that have a lot of small cuts, I don't really worry about it. I just put glue everywhere because once it's dry, it doesn't really matter. Also, pay attention to the different bends. The ones marked with dashed lines will be a valley fold. For those, I start by cutting away a small amount of foam kind of at an angle, and then as I built the mask, I cut away more foam as I needed it. Some beds are more extreme than others and therefore need to cut away more. To keep track of this, I put hash marks on all the folds that needed to be cut away. The spikes on this mask are the trickiest part because they have the most extreme bends in the whole mask, so I did those first. Here I've cut partly through the foam, which is how I built the first dragon. To compensate for the extreme bends in this section, I'm using a heavyweight paper instead of cardstock, and that's going to let me bend those around a lot easier. I didn't even bother cutting this one up, just laid down some glue where I needed it and stuck the whole thing together. Then once the glue is dry, I cut the rest of the way through that foam. I used a slightly dull blade and I was careful not to cut the paper. And yes, I am cutting directly over my hand, which I don't necessarily recommend for most of you, but for me, it was a good feedback for how hard I was pressing. The dull blade deformed the paper enough that I could feel it on my fingers, but not so much that the blade was going actually through the paper. For the other spikes with less bends, I just used strips. Once you have the pieces all put together, make sure you have them all. I did actually lose one and had to remake it from scraps because this is every last piece of foam that I have left. Then you can start assembling just like before. This is all put together, and you notice that I left the teeth a lot bigger than the pattern. I did that so I would have material to play with when I go to carve them out later. For this one, I want to make some eyes for it. So I got a light bulb and drenched it in hot glue. Now you can stop here and paint directly on the hot glue after it cools, but I really didn't think the paint would stick well to the hot glue, so I covered the whole thing in a sheet of thin craft foam to have a better paintable surface. Then you can paint whatever kind of eye design fits your fancy. I did start painting them blue, but later I changed them to green by just putting a yellow wash over the whole thing. Next is a trip to the dragon dentist. I use a grinding stone for this. It works really well for getting a smooth finish on the foam. I do the majority of the sculpting with a knife to cut down on the dust and then smooth it out with the Dremel. Here you can see the stages of progression with the cutting and the grinding and the stuff. Once all the teeth are done, it's time for some paint. I start with a light coat of white and then follow that up with my brother's favorite color, cerulean blue. I also painted the inside black. I left that hanging in the garage overnight to dry, and then we brought it back to the studio for some detail painting.
Guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. What did the red light say to the green light? Don't look, I'm changing.
Winner.